children under the age of 18 were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. We see here a picture of children being deported from the Lodz ghetto. This is in September of 1942. The Lodz ghetto was the second largest ghetto in Poland. When it was established, it was actually the first ghetto to be established in May, I think, of 1940. It was the second largest one with, I think, 160,000 people at its height. In September of 1942, the Nazis sent an order to the Judenrat Elster, who was the head of the Judenrat. His name was Chaim Mordechai Rumkowski. And they told him that he should prepare a list of 10,000 people to be deported. To be deported, it wasn't clear, they didn't say where they were going to be sent to. But by September 1942, Chelmno was very much in use, and it was understood. Chelmno had been in use already since January of 1942, even December of 1941. So by 9 months later, everyone knew that being deported out of the ghetto meant a deportation to death. And he gathered all the residents of the Lodz ghetto on that day in September of 1942, and he asked them to give them what is the most dear to them, which is their children. And he said that in order to fulfill this 10,000 people that he needed to make a list of, that by sending the children and the elderly, then he would be, in his words, cutting off the limbs in order to save the torso. He was very much of the opinion that the Jewish effort in terms of manufacturing in Lodz was very important for the German war effort. And as long as the Jews could show that they were important to that war effort, they would survive, and the ghetto would be maintained. During this speech, there was a great deal of wailing, you can imagine, and crying. And he actually used the word Hatzalah, to rescue, 9 times. Now, according to Jewish halacha, this is not Hatzalah. This is Mesirah. This is because, according to halacha, it is absolutely forbidden to put any other Jewish person into danger, any kind of danger. And it was understood that this was absolutely dangerous. Apparently, he did ask the Rabbanim in the Lodz ghetto before he did this, but nevertheless, and they told him this was absolutely forbidden and prohibited under Jewish law, but nevertheless, he went ahead and did it. In the end, the Nazis took something less than 10,000 people, and they did not even look at his list at all. But here we see a very, very sad picture of little children. They're maybe, 7, 8 years old, lining up to go into these trucks, right? Maybe cattle cars. I'm not sure. It doesn't look like cattle cars, and to be deported to their deaths. 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators during the Shoah. That means that 2 out of every 3 European Jews was killed, and it also means that 1 out of every 3 of Jews survived. For the children, however, the survival rate was much, much lower. It was somewhere between 6 to 10%, which means that only 1 out of every 10 or 12 children survived the war. According to the Onyx Shabbos, which was organized by Emanuel Ringelblum in the Warsaw Ghetto, 99.1% of the children had been deported from the ghetto by the summer of 1942, which was when they had the massive deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka. Before, there were over 51,000 children aged 9 in the Warsaw Ghetto. By November 1942, there were less than 500 left. So children were very much targeted by the Nazi beasts. Now, I'm going to look at some basic assumptions. This is on the basis of an American psychologist called Ronnie Janoff Bowman. And she makes some basic assumptions about everyday life. And she says as follows: children's early learning about their place in the world and what is expected of them takes place in the home. Did you brush your teeth? Come, let's read a bedtime story. You tidied up your toys so nicely. So small children develop a sense of self and a sense of security through the routines that are established by their parents that equips them to socialize in the wider world. According to Ronnie Janoff Bowman, she says that people fundamentally hold three fundamental assumptions about the world. And that is that the world is benevolent, that the world is meaningful, and that I, as a person, am worthy. These are tacit assumptions that serve as a basis for our well being and our guides in navigating daily life. So let's look at all three for a minute. The world is benevolent. This means there are two sub-assumptions to this. This means that that one's overall assumption of the goodness or the virtue of the world is based on the fact that the world is a good place, that people are basically good, okay? And not only that the world is a good place, but also that people that inhabit that world are also good. The second basic assumption, the world is meaningful. This addresses not only why events happen in the world, but why these events happen to specific people. A meaningful world is one where an outcome, which is positive or negative, makes sense because it corresponds to the person's behavior or character. Such a world is therefore predictable, and what happens to us is not random. When an unjust event happens to an undeserving person, it is viewed as unfair or wrong. And little children, even very little children, have a very, very strongly developed sense of what is fair. And thirdly, the self is worthy. The final assumption evaluates oneself as positive, moral, and decent, thus deserving of good outcomes in life. A person's positive self-worth encourages them to be effective in their tasks at hand and fosters a belief that enables an individual to maintain a belief that he or she has the ability to control positive or negative outcomes. And all these three assumptions were shattered for the children during the war. All this was under fire for Jewish children with the onset of the war. Children struggled mightily to make sense of a world turned upside down, as the basic assumptions that they had acquired about life were under assault. Nasty confiscations of personal items such as bicycles, not being allowed to attend school, sudden moving into ghettos, parents not being able to provide adequate food, shelter, or clothing. And parents also faced choiceless choices in trying to protect their families from the growing terror and from the uncertain future. To give their youngsters away to sympathetic Gentiles who were often paid and often extorted ever bigger ransoms from the desperate parents, or to keep the children close to them so as to face the uncertain future together as a family. And children who were separated from their families struggled to survive without their parents. Their childhood was lost, they were bewildered, frightened, and anxious. In this presentation, I will focus on the children themselves, not on their parents and not on their rescuers. I will attempt to unpack the physical, emotional, and psychological impact and feelings and hopes that these Jewish children experienced as the war gathered pace. In hiding, whether in hiding, in the ghettos, or in the camps. We will examine how children cope with the escalating assault on Jewish communities that replaced their secure lives surrounded by loving family with daily trauma, fear, and bewilderment. Rather than basing our discussion chronologically or geographically, I would like to proceed thematically with universal childhood themes such as the normal expectations of everyday life, including play and education, and how those expectations changed with wartime, bringing hunger, disease, child labor, role displacement, separation from parents, and poignant memories of child survivors from this traumatic period in their lives. I will use testimonies and memoirs and also diaries written by teenagers during the war that document their dreams and their hopes for the future and their emotions and fears with great immediacy. In this way, we will truly hear the children's voices. So we will start with playtime. Right? Play Play is an essential part of child's life experience, fostering creativity, social interaction, and mental development. Even in the ghettos and the concentration camps, children sought solace in games. For hidden children who often had few personal belongings, toys took on a special meaning. They could help forge a bond between the children and rescuers or reaffirm a tie to their missing parents or family. Just as importantly, playthings and games help to restore some semblance of normal childhood to youngsters living under very abnormal conditions. Here we have two pictures of two girls. The first one is actually not a girl. She is Rebbe Esther Jungreis. You might be familiar with her. She died 2, 3 years ago, maybe. She was a very, very dynamic personality. She established a Kiruv organization called Hineni in the United States, and she traveled worldwide to speak on this behalf. She was petite, full of energy, and always beautifully turned out. Um, she recalls being deported with her family from her hometown in Hungary, in Szeged, in Hungary, in the summer of in the spring of 1944. At the time, she was a small child of 8 years old, and she was standing along with her family, and she was holding her doll. A little girl. She was holding her doll. Her mother had packed different things, so she was holding her doll. And she remembers that a neighborhood child came over to her, a neighborhood child who she had played with, a non-Jewish child, and she grabbed the doll away from her and she said, "Where you're going, you won't need this." And she remembers as an older person, even the shock and the bewilderment that she felt that someone should take something away from her like this and say something like this to her. The second picture over here is of an older child. Actually, she was a teenager during the war. I think she was born in 1934. Her name is Eva Hyman, also Hungarian, from Grossfadine in Hungary. And she kept a diary. And the diary was found after the war. She unfortunately was deported with her family to Auschwitz, and she did not survive. But her mother came back after. Her mother did survive. He came back after, and she went back to the home, and she found the diary that her daughter had written during this traumatic time. And she wrote as follows: "Today they came for my bicycle. I almost caused a big drama. You know, dear diary, I was awfully afraid just by the fact that the policeman came into the house. I know that policemen bring only trouble with them wherever they go. So, dear diary, I threw myself on the ground, held onto the back of my bicycle, and shouted all sorts of things at the policeman. Shame on you for taking away a bicycle from a girl. That's robbery. We saved for over a year and a half to buy the bicycle." One of the policemen was very annoyed and said, "All we need is for a Jew girl to put up such a comedy when her bicycle is being taken away. No Jew kid is entitled to keep a bicycle anymore. The Jews aren't entitled to bread either. They shouldn't guzzle everything but leave the food for the soldiers." And she ends her entry there. "You can imagine, dear diary, how I felt when they were saying this to my face." The next slide shows a young girl on the left. Her name is Stella Noble. She was born in 1931 in Krakow. And she's pictured over here with her cousin. And she received as a seventh birthday present a teddy bear. And she cherished that teddy bear throughout. She and her parents actually were, should we say, the lucky ones. They ran all the way east, deep into Russia, so that they were never entrapped by the Gestapo, by the German army. And she actually made her way to Israel, to Palestine, actually, in the middle of the war with the Tehran children. Several years ago, Yad Vashem had an exhibition of toys that belonged to children during the war. And she actually gave her toy, her teddy bear, to Yad Vashem. And this is a picture of her lovingly kissing the teddy bear goodbye. And that's the teddy bear that was on show. It's probably still there as part of that exhibition on children. And she says, and I quote, "Because I was an only child who very much wanted a sister and a brother, the teddy is like family. He was my sister and my brother, and I clung to him. I didn't have other toys. He's part of my family, the last remnant of my home in Poland." Education. Education is of overriding importance to the Jewish nation, particularly, and it was in an attempt at normalcy. The Jews did try to run schools even under these terrible conditions. There were tremendous efforts that were expelled in trying to provide education. Rumkowski, who we've met before, was he's really remembered for this diabolical speech that he made in September of 1942. But to his credit, he took a great deal of pride in Jewish education. And for as long as possible, he defended schooling in the ghetto. So here we see a picture of a ghetto classroom in Lodz. And what's interesting here right away is that it seems to be a frum school. It seems to be a cheder of some sort, okay? The boys all have their heads covered, and the teacher also is wearing a couple. What is also interesting is to see that the teacher is wearing the mandated yellow star. Now, you will see that later on, this was not always the same symbol that had to be worn everywhere. In Lodz, it was a yellow star. Elsewhere, it was something else. We'll get to it soon. Um, Now, during 1940 and 1941, the Jewish administration devoted significant resources to the education of the children and vocational training. In the Lodz ghetto, there were no less than 45 elementary schools attended by over 6,000 children, with 2 religious schools, 1 secular institution, and a college for teaching crafts. Of the 7,336 children receiving full-time education, 3/4 also got free meals. The schools also provided employment for teachers and instructors, so that was important as well. Now, this is again from a diary. This is a diary of a young man by the name of David Serkov. What's his name? Right, Sarah Koviak, okay, who was in the Lodz ghetto, and he was 15 years old when the war broke out, and he kept a diary, not actually one diary. He just picked up notebooks of whatever source he could, and he kept a diary of what was going on in these different notebooks. After the war, 5 of those notebooks were found. It's not a complete set. There were some that are still missing. So he writes, this is at the beginning of the war in September of 1939. Tomorrow is the first day of school. Who knows how our dear school has been? Our friends are going there tomorrow to find out what's cooking while I have to stay at home. I have to. My parents say that they are not going to lose me yet. Oh, my dear school. Damn the times when I complained about getting up in the morning and about tests. If only I could have them back. Right? The typical kind of teenager kind of angst being expressed there. Okay, now this is a personality that probably needs no introduction. He is Janusz Korczak, who ran an orphanage for about 200 children in the Warsaw Ghetto up until his deportation. There was a massive deportation from the Warsaw Ghetto in the summer of 1942. So he ran the years from the founding of the Warsaw Ghetto in November 1940 until August the 5th, I think he was deported, 1942. He was a very famous personality. Janusz Korczak was a nom de plume. His real name was Henryk Goldschmidt, and he was a famous author and playwright of some renown in Poland. He had a volunteer in his orphanage, and her name was Gutta Eisenzweig, later Sternbuch, who came to volunteer the last year of the orphanage, from August 1941 until August 1942. They celebrated Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur and Seder at Pesach, where the children sat with clean white shirts at long tables covered with clean tablecloths, and there was a children's choir. At some point after that Pesach Seder, probably in the late spring or early summer of 1942, Janusz Korczak called in Gutta, and he said to me the following. He said to her the following. This is in her book of memoirs. I want to tell you something that is very important to me and to the children as well. Since you have started working here for us, I have taken note of your work with the children. You have given them much love and a great deal of yourself, and I thank you for this. But that isn't all I want to say. You have given them something they haven't had until now. I have heard you reciting the Shema and singing Adon Olam with them and telling them Hasidic stories. I see how their eyes shine and how they go to sleep peacefully. I see how you make them happy. I am an old man. You are too young to understand what it means for me to ask myself now if my entire life hasn't been a mistake. But now I am asking myself if I didn't rob the children when, for all these years, I didn't give them a simple faith, the Jewish warmth of their grandfathers and grandmothers. I am asking you, give the children whatever you can of your faith. Make them happy. You can't help me much. I'm too old. I can only say that I wish my eyes had been opened earlier. I too wish I could stand before God as a Jew and teach the children how to pray to God. Tell them that God is close to them and hears them too. I am too am seeking a prayer. Do you understand me, my child? And this is a picture of Janusz Korczak with his children in the background. It might have been in the Umschlagplatz, which is when they were deported. I'm not sure. But he has the children alongside and behind him. You can see this little girl is clutching a doll. There's another little doll over here being clutched by another child. And in Warsaw, they did not wear a yellow badge or a yellow star on their breast. They wore a white armband, as you can see on this little chart, and in this little chart, a white armband with a blue Mogen David on it. That was what was mandated there. And this is if this is a picture of him leading his children. Um, he this is a from a Warsaw Ghetto Diary by Abraham Levine. His selflessness in accompanying the children to certain death immediately passed into legend because actually he was offered by the underground. He was offered false papers so that he could have saved himself. But he knew that he couldn't save the children, and he wanted to be with the children until the last moment, to be able to comfort them and to keep them calm and serene. Uh, so his selflessness in accompanying the children to certain death immediately passed into legend, along with the display of courage by the infants who trooped in good time. Young souls now condemned to death. They marched so quietly, so purposely towards their untimely end. At that time, there was no selections. The trains that went from Warsaw in the summer of 1942 went straight to Treblinka, where they were gassed upon arrival. So these children met their untimely end there. Hunger was an all-pervasive accompaniment to the ghetto, and it got worse and worse and worse as the years progressed. Here we see a picture of children lining up and waiting for their food. So there's a couple of things here. This is Lodge. So again, there's a yellow star on the breasts of some of the children. It's interesting that they are small children. They are 10, 9, 11, and yet they have to wear the yellow star as well. They are dressed quite shabbily, and many of them are holding little pots or little pails here, right, in which they are probably going to get a portion of soup. And here we have again from David Sarakoviak about the hunger. As a student from the same grade as ours died from hunger and exhaustion yesterday. As a result of his terrible appearance, he was allowed to eat as much soup as he wanted, but it didn't help him much. He's the third victim in the class. This is May 1941, incarcerated in ghetto for a year. I'm damnably hungry. Is everyone okay here? My internet okay? Yeah. Okay. I console myself that I'm the only one. I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one in such a dire situation. When I receive my ration of bread, I can hardly control myself, and sometimes suffers so much from exhaustion that I have to eat whatever food I have, and then my small loaf of bread disappears before the next ration is issued, and my torture grows. Our grave will apparently be here. Our grades were read to us today. I got the best grade in the class, all A's and B's. But what good are they when I'm still hungry and keep feeling so terribly exhausted? Our bread ration, this is in August, this is all 1941, and then this is half a year later, March 1942. Our bread ration has been reduced and vegetables don't arrive anymore. Hunger is ever more terrifying. The less there is to eat, the more people talk about covered tables and reminisce about the good old days before the war. At work, the only topic of conversation is food that we had before the war. And by April of 1942, he is no longer in education, he's working. And he says, all I care about is that there is soup in my workshop. Role displacement. We have a situation here where, again, this is part of the shattered assumptions where children are taken care of by their grown-ups. Um, um, where instead the children are doing the jobs that grown-ups really should be doing. So here we have two pictures. The first one on the left is of three young boys, again, maybe 8, 9, 10. Um, and there is a basket of, looks like bagels or pretzels or something. This boy is selling, and this is his customer. And next to him over here is a boy with a basket around his neck that is empty. So obviously he has already sold his quota for the day. So again, we this is a role displacement because it shouldn't be that the children are out there selling goods like this. And the second one is also children selling. I this child I think is selling cigarettes, and I'm not sure what she is selling. And it's very interesting to me to look at this and see that they're actually smiling. This might have been very early in the days, I'm not sure. And you might be asking yourself, who had money when there was nothing to eat for cigarettes? And the fact of the matter is that there was an upper class in Warsaw that continued to party and that had assets, and they were able to really live fairly well. And this is a very, very emotive picture, really, of child smugglers in the Warsaw Ghetto. By the time the Warsaw Ghetto, late in the Warsaw Ghetto, in like 1942, early 1943, it's estimated that the average daily intake was 180 calories per person. Now, 180 calories per person is really starvation. It's 3 apples with nothing else, or 3 slices of bread with nothing else for everyone. And so the food was very, very much supplemented by smuggling from outside the Warsaw Ghetto. And the chief smugglers, they say that up to 80% of the food that came in smuggled into the Warsaw Ghetto was done by the children. So we have here, the reason is that intriguingly, children had a vital advantage over adults. Being less cynical, they were more likely to feel invulnerable and to be fearless and to believe that they could get away with things no matter how risky their exploits. And that exuded a natural air of self-confidence, which was often the best defense against detection. So here we have, these two pictures are connected. We have a hole in the wall, right? You can see the bricks here, and I guess they brick it up afterwards when he's come through. They've opened a hole in the wall, and these two boys are helping a third child to come through the wall. And here he's coming through the wall, and he needs help because his pockets. It's very difficult to see on the picture, but his pockets are full of potatoes, apples, carrots, cabbage, whatever it is that he could get hold of. So that was one way that they did it. Another way they did it actually was going underneath, which was in the sewers. And a third way that they did it was what this picture shows, which is actually going over the wall. So Warsaw Ghetto was surrounded by a wall that was very, very tightly controlled by gendarmes that policed around on the outside. The top of the wall also, you don't see it in this picture, had shards of glass and barbed wire, so that it was very, very difficult to go over. But yet we see here groups of children, right, climbing up and looking to see when the gendarme is looking the other way so they can jump over and get into the Aryan side and be able to beg, borrow, or steal some kind of food to bring back. Okay, so we have here 3 children going over, and there are, it looks like mothers perhaps watching their children going over. And again, I can't stress enough, this was a choiceless choice for the mothers as well. because the children very often risked being caught and being killed. And on the other hand, the mother would say, I have nothing to feed my family. So if my 8 year, if nobody goes out to get any food, then we all starve. And at least if my 8-year-old Rommela goes to the other side, he might come back with something. So this was the choiceless choice that was faced by the parents. Taking responsibility for younger siblings, okay? And we do have that here sometimes, yes, that you do take, but it depends on what level of responsibility. Here I'm talking about a very high level of responsibility that was forced on this child, and it was commonly done. Artek Poznansky was not yet 15 at the time of the deportations. This was from the Pietrków ghetto in November of 1944. And his brother Jacek was 12. They both worked at the Hortensia factory in Pietrków. On returning to the 2.5 streets that now comprised the ghetto, because the ghetto had been made smaller and smaller, he was handed a note hastily scribbled by his mother, which read, "We are being taken. May God help you, as we cannot do anything more for you. And whatever else may happen, look after Jacek. He is but a child and has got no one else." He was distraught. No parents, no home, no money, and a younger brother to look after. What am I to do? In the end, Artek and Jacek actually were not together for the rest of the war. One of them, I think, was sent to Bergen-Belsen, and the other one ended up in Theresienstadt. But they were reunited after the war, and they were two of the 732 children who came to the UK after the war in 1945 to Windermere. Okay, they're written about in the book that Martin Gilbert's book, The Boys. Now here we have a very this, I think this is my favorite my favorite photo of all, and this is Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, the former chief rabbi of Israel. And this is a picture of him on his when he was liberated. He was liberated in Buchenwald, and you can see behind him the soldiers, the American soldiers standing behind him. And he's actually wearing, this jacket that he's wearing is actually a Hitler Jugend uniform, because that was the only thing that was available in Buchenwald right after the war to replace the torn schmattes, the pajamas that he had been wearing. And he wrote a very beautiful memoir about his life called Out of the Depths. It was published about 8, 9, 10 years ago. And in it, he talks about his separation from his mother. His mother, Rebbe Simchaya Lau, his father was the chief rabbi of Petrikov, and his father had been taken long before. The mother was left with 2 boys. The oldest boy, Naftali, and the middle one had already been taken, and the youngest one, who was Yisrael Meir, who they called Lulik. And Chaya Lau was a very clever woman. And she understood when they were being herded together and to be deported from Pietrikov, she understood that the men would perhaps be sent to slave labor, but that the women and children would be murdered. And she actually was sent to Ravensbrück and murdered there. So she shoved her 7-year-old Yisrael Meir, whom they called Lulik, over to Lulik, who's Naftali, to his older brother. And she said to him, Tulik, take Lulik. Goodbye, Tulik. Goodbye, Lulik. And Yisrael Meir Lau writes, the moment was intensely traumatic for me. I screamed in terror and transferred all my rage at the separation to Naftali, my brother. I beat my small fists against his chest unceasingly. He tried to hug me and calm me down, but I refused to be comforted. I kept hitting him and screaming, what have you done to me? Why did you take me? I want to be with mother. In retrospect, this was clearly the hardest moment I experienced in all 6 years of war. Never before and never since did I cry as I did on that day of my separation from mother. To separate from your mother is inconceivable. It hurts your whole being, all the years of your life. It took me a long time to understand that when mother pushed me toward Naftali, she saved my life. We can't do something over here without actually mentioning the Kindertransport. Now, the Kindertransport was the saving of 10,000 Jewish children from Germany and Austria between Kristallnacht in November 1939 until the outbreak of the war in September 1940. sorry, November, Kristallnacht, November 1938, until the outbreak of the war of September 1939. So there was 10 months where these children were coming to England. And this is a picture of children arriving at Liverpool Street Station. What is perhaps not as well known is that children, that parents beseech their children, and parents were able to write to each other up until, well, even when the war started, actually. And parents constantly beseech their children to try to arrange passage for them as well. And there's a beautiful story that's told. Apparently, the King George was riding in a carriage, and along the sides of the road were groups of Kindertransport children, and they were all waving flags, and it was to show the thankfulness of the Kindertransport organization that the UK had given refuge to these children. And one little boy broke ranks and went over to the king. And the king stopped. And the little boy said to him, I thank you so much for saving my life and giving me a chance at a new life over here. But I'm asking you, please, can you also bring my parents? And the king was very kind. He took the child's name, he took the parents' name, and he took their address, and he arranged for them to be brought over. So this was our story of the Kindertransport, of a child actually taking responsibility for his parents. Now, there were tremendous religious challenges that were faced by children in hiding. Thousands of children survived in the Holocaust because they were protected by people and institutions of other faiths. Dozens of Catholic convents in German-occupied Poland independently took in Jewish youngsters. Belgian Catholics hid hundreds of children in their homes, schools, and orphanages. And French Protestant townspeople in and around the Chambon-sur-Lyon sheltered several thousand Jews. The Chambon-sur-Lyon is in the Alps, close to the Swiss border, and they helped them to escape to the Swiss border into Switzerland. In Albania and Yugoslavia, some Muslim families concealed youngsters. Children quickly had to learn to master the prayers and rituals of their adopted religion in order to keep their Jewish identity hidden, even from their closest friends. Many Jewish youngsters were baptized into Christianity with or without the knowledge of their parents. And here we have a picture of Beatrix Westheimer and her cousin Henri Ovitz with the Catholic priest Adeline Weiss on the occasion of Beatrix's first communion in Ottigny in Belgium, May of 1943. I must state it's generally the Catholics that baptize the children. Protestant families were more tolerant and kind of left them to their own devices, although they would take them sometimes to church as well on Sundays. Okay, hopes and aspirations. Okay, we have here a beautiful picture of a young man by the name of Moshe Flinker. Moshe Flinker was born in 1926. He was Dutch. I think the family lived in Amsterdam. They were a religious family. He had one brother and four sisters, and they moved to Brussels during the war, where they lived openly under an assumed identities because nobody knew them there. Okay, they were unfortunately betrayed by a Jew, which is very painful, in April of 1944. And Moshe and most of the family were sent to Auschwitz. He did not survive. His parents did not survive. Two of his sisters did survive, and two of his younger sisters were actually, they had the chance to give them over to an orphanage in Brussels. There was an orphanage called, what was his name? The famous orphanage? Tiefenbrunner, Jona Tiefenbrunner. So two of the younger sisters survived over there. But he kept a diary. And the diary was found by the surviving sisters when they came back after the war. And he wrote as follows: during the past few days, when my mother raised the question of my future, my reaction was again one of laughter. And when I was alone, I too began to ponder this matter. What indeed is to become of me? It is obvious that the present situation will not last forever, perhaps another year or two, but what will happen then? One day I will have to earn my own living. After much deliberation, I've decided to become a statesman. Isn't that beautiful? Okay. He is at that time 16 years old. And here is a photo of his diary, okay, very closely written. And you can see that he writes in four languages, okay. The right-hand side is written in Yiddish. The left-hand side over here is written in Dutch, right, or Flemish, and also in English, childhood good dear days, alas, so often they were, right? So few they were. Okay, and on the bottom over here, he's writing in Ivrit. Okay, so he was quite an accomplished young man, quite an accomplished young man, right? But those were his aspirations. Um, The Nazis delighted in using times of the year that are important in the Jewish calendar to carry out their operations. And there was a very famous one that was carried out on Erev Yom Kippur in 1944 in Auschwitz. And what happened was that Mengele, Yamach um, took two goalposts and he put a pole between them, and he put it at a reasonable height, and he lined up all the boys, and he said everybody has to walk under it, and whoever can walk under it is condemned because they're too young. They'll be 10 or 11 or 12. But whoever is tall enough and can reach his head can reach the pole, he will be saved to work for another day. The reason I say that they often did this on times of the Jewish calendar is because we say in the Yom Kippur davening and also in the Rosh Hashanah davening, Kavakarat Edroi, that Hashem judges us like a shepherd who has all the sheep coming coming under his staff. So he was doing the same thing, that all the boys had to go under his staff. There was a young boy by the name of Toby Green, and he was clever, but he was small. And so he came to his turn, and he didn't quite reach the right, and he realized that he was part of the condemned boys. So he waited until nobody was looking, and he joined the queue again, and he went again to be passed under, and again he didn't reach it. And he was assigned to the side where the boys were condemned to death. He came back again a third time, and he still didn't reach it because he hadn't grown. So he jumped up and he said to Mengele, "Ich will leben. Ich will arbeiten. I want to live and I can work." Mengele was taken aback. He looked at this young child and he spared him. That's the story of um, the hope that should never, ever fade. Okay, and this is David Serebrakoviak, who we've talked about before, the Lodz Ghetto. I so very much want to live and survive. His last entry is in April of 1943, and he did not survive. He died in the ghetto of TB in August of 1943. Memories, emotions, and feelings. Now here I have two different people talking about their memories as child survivors. Renee Koenig Bornstein was born in 1934 in Strasbourg. And she and her older sister and her younger brother were hidden by different families and in different children's homes during the war, and the parents were hiding elsewhere. At the end of the war, they were separated from their parents for about 6 months. They went from one thing to another. They had tremendous escapes, very narrow escapes, and eventually they were able to smuggle over the border from France into safety into Switzerland. And she says, and she lives now in. She married somebody called Bornstein. They lived in Munich, and she lives now in Manchester. As an adult now, when people ask me about my wartime experiences, I feel I lost my childhood. I was only 10 years old. I never found it again. I never learned how to be truly carefree. When you are in hiding, when you are arrested, you live in fear and confront death every day and every minute. How could I have been a child again? And here we have Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau. And this is again from his book, Out of the Depths. Over the years, I occasionally have asked myself what my most vivid, distinct memories of the Holocaust are. And I find myself singling out three things: dogs, boots, and trains. All three were there on the platform in Pietrkov. The dogs ran amok, the German soldiers' boots thundered everywhere, and the trains filled with more and more Jews. To conclude, even in the most barbaric times, a human spark glowed in the rudest heart, and children were spared. But the Hitlerian beast is quite different. It would devour the dearest of us dearest of us, those who aroused the greatest compassion, our innocent children. So there children were faced with these shattered assumptions of that the world is good, that the world is benevolent, and and that I have value as well. There are some extreme events which we would refer to as traumatic, that severely challenge and break our assumptions about the world and ourselves. Such events could be the unwarranted murder of a loved one, being critically injured, being emotionally abused, losing a job, or living through a pandemic. Such events are particularly traumatic for people who have generally had a positive life and have strong optimistic assumptions about the world around them. So here we have shattered assumptions, and instead of a trajectory to life, children realize that the trajectory was to death. And this is a quote of a little child: night. A weak light of kerosene lamp lights up the dusk that reigns over the room. Suddenly I felt someone's touch. I opened my eyes. Over me stood mother, dear, unforgotten mother. I understood that the action, expected since a week, had come. Okay. I have some concluding thoughts. Um, what is amazing about these children is the fact that despite their appalling situations and living conditions, children still engaged in imaginative play, sketching, writing, expressing their hopes, expressing their dreams and their hopes for the future. Their display of optimism, positivity, and imagination demonstrate the unique capacity of children to hold on to the forces of life despite living in unspeakable circumstances. I actually have something else to show, but I'm not sure. I think I've gone a little bit too long, so maybe we'll stop there. I have something to show, which is about the child's memorial in the Warsaw Cemetery, and I have the text of it if we want to read it quickly. But if not, then I'll stop and take some questions. I'm very happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much indeed. That was wonderful. Could you please unmute yourselves if you would like to ask any questions?
Hello, hello.
Yeah, carry on.
Shoshana, you show a picture of a memorial in the Warsaw Cemetery.
Yes, yes.
Now, I understood there were two cemeteries because we went back to Warsaw trying to find any trace of my grandparents and our aunts and uncles.
Yes.
And there was not, it didn't look anything like this. I don't remember seeing that. That must have been later.
Well, did you go to the large cemetery? Is called the Okopova, I think, cemetery.
That's the only one I found. But
Right.
Somebody said there was another one over the river.
Oh, I don't know about that one, but I know that the major, it's as big as Hyde Park. It's enormous.
Huge. It's
Okay.
It's massive. And
Yes.
there were people working on trying to restore
Correct.
the stones, but
Correct.
they ran out of money eventually. But
Correct. But at the beginning, before we actually go into it, when you come in, it's on the right-hand side. There is this memorial there for
you
children.
don't know how long that's been there. That looks
Oh, quite a few years. At least 15 years, I think.
Hmm. Don't recall seeing that. I'm not sure how long. I think we were there more than 15 years ago.
Okay.
We found no trace. We went to the Jewish Centre. We went to see the Lauder people, and
Right.
we never got anywhere with it. So I had to give up.
That's a shame. You know that you have relatives that were buried in the cemetery.
I don't know if they were buried. They were disappeared without trace. They may have been and they may not have been. We
Okay.
don't know anything about them. I didn't even know their names because my father never spoke about it.
Oh.
I found out later.
That's
So,
sad. That's
one of
very-
those things. I did what I could.
Okay, any more
Hello.
questions?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Judy Curtis speaking. Thank you for a very interesting report on what happened. So sad, but I've got something a bit more uplifting to tell you.
Good.
That Rabbi Lau, Chief Rabbi Lau, married my son to his Israeli wife 20 years ago. And it was very thrilling and exciting and wonderful. And my Machatunim were just ordinary folk. So how on earth did the Israeli chief rabbi come to marry their son, rather their daughter to my son? Well, they were both children together in Germany. And I think it was Germany. They had a German name, Rothenburg. And my Machatunim, well, not the wife, but just Rabbi Lau and his family, the Rothenburgs left Germany and they got out and they went to Palestine and lived there until it became Israel. And as you said, that Rabbi Lau, he also managed to survive as a child and grew up and arrived in Israel, and they were reunited. The Cheder Bochers were reunited, and they remained friends, and that's when they married. He married our son, and they're still friends. And now, of course, I didn't realize, I heard from you that his father had been a chief rabbi, and as you all know, that the son became a chief rabbi of Israel. What a wonderful family. So I thought you'd like to hear a lovely, happy ending.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. The Lau family is a family of rabbis for many, many, many generations. But I would have thought Chief Rabbi Lau spent his childhood in Pietrków, which is in kind of western part of Poland. So if you say that they were childhood friends, he must have been in Pietrków as well.
Maybe so, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All I know is that I've seen them together and it was just wonderful.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Any more comments? Okay, in that case, may I please ask Stephen to give the vote of thanks?
Yes, I would be delighted. Dr. Perl, thank you, Dr. Perl. We would like to see your face and for you to see us. I know that the relationship between your family and Bournemouth is a close one. We love seeing your family here when they are here. We've missed them over the last year, and we hope that we'll see them again very soon. And I want to thank you on behalf of everybody who has watched this evening for making children the focus of your talk, because through you, those children, I think, have left an indelible mark on all of us. We all have seen harrowing photographs of Holocaust victims and survivors, and the ones that make the biggest mark are the children. The groups of children in their striped pajamas behind the barbed wire of Auschwitz, even fictional or as it may be, the girl in the red coat in Schindler's List. They are the things that are imprinted on our memory. And you've brought them alive for us, even tragically, those that didn't make it. I thought it was really interesting, particularly given your family's interest, benevolence, and goodwill educationally through the Huntington Trust, that you used the idea of the world being a benevolent place, being a meaningful place, and being a place of self-worthiness. Because that's what children get from their education. And the children who survived, and I must tell you that my wife and I are watching you in a house that housed a kinder transport child from 1939 until 1946, when the house was owned 2 owners before us by a non-Jewish couple who took that child from Hamburg in, a child that lost her parents and her brother who didn't get out. That those children that survived went on to re-evaluate their lives and recognize again that the world can be a benevolent and meaningful place, and that they did have a place in it. You mentioned Chief Rabbi Lau, you mentioned the Windermere boys. Many of these people went on to, notwithstanding their privations, to wonderful, productive lives. And I think that we should take great comfort and heart from the indomitable spirit of the human being to come through these kind of tragedies and still make it. And for those who worry about how kids might react and respond to missing 3 or 4 months of school over the last year, I would suggest to them that those children have had it easy in comparison with the children that you were talking about. You've been remarkable, and on behalf of all of us, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you, Shani. And we look forward to seeing you in our next Zoom event. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
You need to switch off the recording now.
Yeah.